Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming back for our continuing class on Swamiji's wonderful book, Divine Friendship. This is really turning out to be an absolutely glorious series. I knew it would be, but even still, it's exceeded my expectations in many ways. So just delighted to be able to do this. I must confess, it doesn't take much to get me to talk about Swamiji, and so this has really been a great excuse, and I've just enjoyed it thoroughly. So let's now start with a prayer before we chant and meditate for a little bit. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swamiji, help us to feel your presence. Help us to move from affirmation, aspiration, into actual experience. Speak to us. Vibrate in our hearts, that as we move through this world, we can know with certainty what is your guidance, what is your will for us, that we may live this life as we are intended to live it, in joy, surrender, perfect love. We are your children. Be with us always. Om. Peace. Amen.
spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. Fill my body, fill my spirit, fill me with the sound of Om. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart. God of beauty is now reigning in the temple of beauty is now reigning in the temple of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart, of my heart, of my heart, in the temple of my heart.
Let's meditate now for a few minutes. Thank you. Om, peace. Amen. Keshav, the light is now blocking the clock, so one or the other has to be moved a little bit. Nope, that didn't do it. The other way. There, you've got it. Thank you. All right, friends. Thank you for the chanting, the meditation, everything. Okay. We're still in the section on marriage and renunciation. We'll probably be here for a couple more weeks, at least tonight, next week, maybe one more. So, this is dated June 22nd, 1979. I haven't the foggiest idea what the context is, except what I can guess. On working with an unwilling spouse, it says, I think what you have been reading on renunciation in marriage assumes that both partners are on the path and are willing. This is like, here we go again. This is what we were dealing with in several of the letters last week. It's the difference between what you can read and what you really have to intuit as the truth. And how every single teaching has to be intuitively applied. It just cannot be dogmatically applied. I have seen so much difficulty on the spiritual path, particularly in the area of relationships, renunciation, and sexuality, but in all aspects of the path, where people see something written and become fixated on that's what I'm supposed to do, and I just don't understand how to apply it in a practical way. I think it's to be practical in your idealism is what we're working with. I think what you've been reading on renunciation marriage assumes that both partners are on the path and are willing. And I don't quite understand this sentence, but there is a balance in your personal situation. I think what he means was, with greater patience you may find it for yourself. I don't know what he means, those sentences are unclear to me, but what he's saying is somehow between the outer and the inner, and with greater patience you may find it for yourself. If he says there is a balance in your personal situation, maybe he's saying that the husband is a good match. I feel like this is written by a woman. The husband is a good match, and there's a balance in the life that she's living. Yes, that's what he's saying. There's a balance in your personal situation. With more patience, you may find it within yourself. So she's not feeling comfortable, but he says the situation may be just fine, and maybe you're just the one who has to change. He hasn't said it explicitly, but that's the implication. Try to see your husband as a manifestation of God. Serve him with this attitude. You might visualize him in meditation surrounded by light. Sooner or later, there's a lot in that phrase, sooner or later, he will be more attracted to the subtler aspects of your relationship as he experiences this divine energy directed toward him, instead of, as he now thinks, it's being directed too much elsewhere. So Swami's a little bit trying to correct this woman. If I knew the circumstances, I could comment more confidently, but to a certain extent, he's implying that the problem is not in the situation, the problem is in the way she's relating to it. You've been reading these texts about marriage and renunciation, now you're trying to apply them to your life, but your situation is actually quite balanced. It's you yourself that you have to balance. So, and then he says, bring God into your life, bring God into your marriage. Apparently, he is feeling that she's neglecting him for her spiritual life, and he's saying, your spiritual life is your relationship, and that if you don't use, what could be going on here is that she's using her spiritual interest as a way to denigrate him, and that she wants to be spiritual, and whatever it might be, who knows. Bring God into every action in your life. In this way, you will bridge the separation that is now growing between yourself and your husband. You will be able to see your relationship together as a way of serving God. Your husband, moreover, will see your spiritual efforts as strengthening to your relationship rather than undermining it. I mean, this letter, in contrast to many of the others that we've read, Swami is just saying to this woman, this is what you need to do. I mean, in others, I've pointed out how carefully he responds, how he makes suggestions without really being accusatory. Here, he's just frankly telling her, that you need to change your attitude, it's actually quite interesting because obviously Swami felt inclined to do that. I can imagine situations like that. I've been in situations where, I've helped. I've been called into situations, either by one or the other or both in a couple, where it's like one or the other is using spiritual language and spiritual interest to mask attitudes that are not at all spiritual. And that's the implication I'm getting from this, is that this woman is judgmental conceivably and being selfish, and is calling it that I want to be more spiritual than he wants to be. But Swami's not supporting her. He's not supporting her at all. Renunciation means giving up all our attachments and all our selfish attitudes. It doesn't mean giving up our responsibilities in serious relationships. So he's actually quite reprimanding her quite strongly. He's just correcting an attitude that is not the right attitude here. Renunciation means giving up our attachments and our selfish attitudes. He's using the word selfish attitudes. There's no further explanation. Are there children involved in this marriage? Are there young children in the family? What kind of a man is he? It implies that he's a good man, because he says there is balance in your relationship. Swami did not have a do or die attitude toward lifelong marriage, but he also did not allow people to be frivolous. It doesn't mean giving up our responsibilities in serious relationships, because what I remember him commenting about this in other settings, that somebody would break up a relationship in the name of being a renunciate, either literally or in principle. That so-and-so is holding me back, so I'm going to become a renunciate. And Swami said in a very short period of time they would be involved in another relationship. So it wasn't really that they were ready to transcend relationships. They were just tired of the one they were in. And so he did not support that when he knew that that was really what was really going on, which certainly seems true in this case. At least he's saying more effort is required before you would have the karmic freedom to walk away from this. And because, as I said, I have no idea who the people are, I'm just guessing from what I do know. try these ideas anyway if they feel right to you. He gives her a little bit of an out. Please let me know the results. But it's pretty direct advice. This is what you must do. And Swami took marriage seriously because he took commitment seriously. And he did not think that fickleness and frivolity was helpful in a marriage. I remember a woman asked Swamiji once, let's see, how exactly did it go? Oh, the woman was disinclined to have a physical relationship with her husband. She just more or less lost interest. And so she asked Swamiji, how important is it for a woman to be celibate? He said, it's more important for a man than it is for a woman. We talked about that a lot last week. He said, but there's a greater law in place here. And he said, thou shalt not humiliate thy spouse. That's what he said. In other words, selfish attitudes are not spiritual attitudes. Once you make a marriage commitment, there is a certain expectation in that commitment, and you can't just impose your preferences on top of that, even in a matter as intimate where you can find such spiritual justification as I want to be celibate. Thou shalt not humiliate thy spouse. I think we talked about it at great length last week, so I'm not going to go into it more, but I forgot to mention that one story. It was very interesting. In the Bible, it says something about, once the couple is married, the woman's body belongs to the man and the man's body belongs to the woman. And that was a very poetic reference to the fact that we become dependent upon one another, and it's simply not fair. And more than that, it's devastating. But we did talk about it last week, so I won't go into it more. Okay, this one. This is from July 1994. So the summary says, seek a loving relationship with God. Swami writes, I have prayed and meditated on your letter and shall do my best to answer it. How sweet of Swamiji to tell the person he's writing to how seriously he took the question. I've prayed and meditated on your letter and shall do my best to answer it. I think that in your longing for a romantic relationship, your heart is actually longing for much more than that. It seems to me that at the essence of your desire for a romantic relationship is your soul's longing for its relationship with God. Now, of course, that could always be said. I mean, I don't want to use the word cliche, but the fundamental understanding of Sanatana Dharma is that what the heart is always longing for is fulfillment in God, and every outward involvement that we seek is just a substitute from that. But Swami doesn't write it as a cliche. He writes, I have prayed and meditated on you particularly, and what I feel in your longing for a relationship with another person is that you're really longing for God. And I think he's implying many things, some of which he says later, which is the implication being you won't find the fulfillment you're seeking there, because the fulfillment you're seeking is bigger than any one person can give you. However, then he says, I'm not saying don't seek a wife or that you should enter a monastery, but I am saying seek a loving relationship above all with God and with the Divine Mother. So he directs the man toward the feminine aspect of God, so that feminine, that longing for the male, for the feminine, can be fulfilled. Swami writes very carefully. He doesn't just use words. He infuses every word with his intention. From your letter, it seems that there has been a certain dryness in your search for God, that it has been too intellectual. Swami Sri Yukteswar, the great saint of wisdom, wrote in his book, The Holy Science, that the first thing one must develop on the spiritual path is the heart's love, and that without that love, one cannot advance a single step on the path. I remember once when a certain devotee became involved in a romantic relationship after many years of not following that path. Swami remarked that the person had a spiritual problem that they were trying to solve in a human way. It was a very interesting comment, isn't it? That, and here's what he's saying is, you're right. There's dryness in your life. You've been too intellectual, and you're longing for a romantic human relationship is because your heart does feel starved. And that feeling of starvation is true. And it does need to be rectified. That there needs to be more devotion in your spiritual life, because if you're thinking just to have a female, to have a partner in your life, and that will awaken your heart, you could be mistaken in that. Or you could be easily misguided because you're not strong in yourself and you're hoping to be fed from the outside. That's what he's implying. Don't go too much by thought. It is not a saint's thoughts that make him outstanding. It's his perceptions. It's a very interesting contradiction he's making. Don't go too much by ideas. Don't just think about this idea and how it applies. And I had a conversation a few years ago with someone, and they wanted to talk about everything in the abstract. And I wanted to bring it down immediately to the issues that were in front of them. But the person just kept wanting to talk about it in the abstract. If he could just get the ideas just right, that somehow that would mean something. And what Swami's here is, it's not the ideas of a saint, it's not the words that he has and the beautiful ideas, it's his actual state of realization. I realized at a certain point with Swamiji that whereas I was cultivating the right attitude, this came in the question of the fact that he never, in all the years that I knew him, referred to my chronological age. And there were many times when my immaturity and inexperience tested his patience, let's put it that way. But he never, ever gave in to that thought or even in any way hinted at that. And when I expressed gratitude for that many decades later, he said quite simply he never noticed. He says, chronological age, the age of the body, is the most trivial thing about a person. That's how he put it. And he said, literally, I never noticed. He said, I just look into people's eyes. I see their soul. I don't relate to the body that surrounds them. That's just, that comes and goes and comes and goes. And that was when I realized that whereas I had this idea in my mind, because by that point I was decades older than many of the people I was working with, I had this idea in my mind that I needed to respect people for their soul nature, not use my chronological development as a reason why I would necessarily be wiser or anything like that. And it wasn't hard for me to do that. Sometimes I had to remind myself, but it wasn't difficult. But I was aware of age, very much aware of age. Swami wasn't. It's when the saint really moves into another state of consciousness, he simply perceives the world differently. Master said, if you could see yourselves as I see you, I would see that you're nothing but light, nothing but beautiful light. So he didn't have to try to sort of see the spirit. Master didn't have to try to see the spirit in people. He just saw the spirit in people. It wasn't his idea about it. It was his actual realization. So this is what Swami is saying to this over-intellectual person. It's not that you need to study these ideas and get them exactly right. You need to open your heart. And when you open your heart, you will feel and know the truth of these ideas. And that's what will give you your spiritual power. He says, don't go too much by thought. It's not a saint's thought that make him outstanding. It's his perceptions. But all this will unfold as your heart's qualities develop more. Another thing that will help you very much is satsang, good company. It would be a good thing for you to visit Ananda sometimes. Whoever this person is, they're outside the community. Okay, on to the next one. This was written in February of 2003. Someone asked the question on why couples at Ananda live together before marriage and don't practice celibacy. Someone actually asked me recently if many couples lived at Ananda for a long time without getting married. And actually, and I think my memory is accurate about this, I don't think so. It's not that couples don't live together before they're married, but I don't think we have many couples that just move in together and live together for a long time without the commitment of marriage. Swamiji favors the commitment. But here's what he says. Swami writes, I too am uncomfortable with some of those decisions. I love the way Swami's just so honest. He doesn't try to put anything on. Why do couples live together? Why are they not celibate before marriage? Well, I too am not so comfortable with those decisions. He doesn't shine it on. He just says it like it is. But I decided years ago that to win people to higher truths, I had to go with what they understood as right for them in the context of today's society. A leader can only lead, he must never try to drive. Now, this is something that Swamiji has discussed at great length, and I don't think he does it that much in this book, but at other times we've talked about it. Our society now is so fractured. I mean, we live in it. We were born into it, so we don't really have a point of reference, but there's so much instability. There's so much fickleness. And we did talk about this last week. There's so much over-sexualization of life. There's so much exaggerated emphasis put on romantic relationships, and so much, what's the word? I was starting to use the word promiscuity, but so much just freedom, sexual freedom, that nobody even thinks about these days. You know, there was a time if a woman, for example, conceived a child and wasn't married, her life would be ruined and her child would never be accepted in society. Now, the celebrities that everyone admires, they just have multiple children without the benefit of marriage. And, you know, there's a whole world just built on without any of the traditional expectations. I personally just take it as it comes. But to then sort of pull up some orthodox idea of traditional behavior and try to put it onto people who've never been raised, who have absolutely no training and no context for that kind of strictness, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, it's like almost no one is a virgin. Almost no one is without sexual experience in our society. Perhaps, I mean, there are levels and there are levels, but it's just the way people behave. And then all of a sudden they join the ashram, and you tell them now that they have to be very orthodox and very strict in where they behave, but they're already experienced. It's not like you're having these temple virgins just come in and, you know, their whole life is controlled and you can run it in a certain way. It's completely crazy. And even within Ananda communities, even the village nowadays, in the very first years, it was more isolated, but our communities are not isolated from society. And we don't turn our backs on society. So all of that vibration is just part of us. So Swami said, regardless of what he thinks, you know, I myself am not comfortable, but I decided I needed to work with people as they understand themselves in the context of how they were raised. Swamiji said to me at one point, I think he said it's going to take at least 2 generations, he said, before the whole family relationships situation in the world, and certainly in America, gets straightened out. He said, we're going to have to raise 2 generations of people with a very different attitude before we're going to be able to see a stabilization in society again. That's quite a comment. And in other contexts, Swami has said, you know, it's better that people be monogamous, even without the commitment of marriage, than that they be too frivolous in their relationships. So he said, as he put it at one point, in this very, very restless society, it's better for people to have one relationship, even if it is not that long lasting. At least it prevents them with the opportunity to at least be committed and go deeper, at least for a time. It was just very realistic. It doesn't mean that he approved. It's that he looked at what was in front of him and he thought, what is the next step? Rather than what is the impossible ideal that I'm going to put before these people. He says a leader can only lead. He must never try to drive. And then he says, I can discuss this matter with you sometime. I'm too busy now to go into them as deeply as they require. My hope is that with our teachings, people will be inspired to discipline themselves and to try always to go in the right direction. See, that was how beautifully expressed. With our teachings, people will be inspired to try to aspire to a higher and to go in the right direction. Swami always talked about values as being directional. Many people try to make values, especially sexual values, absolute. He says it's directional. And people can only be what they are, but if they're going in the right direction, that's what you're really looking for at all times. Swami says, basically, my policy has been one of non-intervention rather than one of approval. I love the way he parses the words out. One of non-intervention rather than one of approval. He's often said to us, basically, your personal life is up to you. I'm not going to interfere in your personal life. And when you start making rules or even strong recommendations about people's sexual relationships, you are right in the middle of their personal lives. And Swami, just for one, he just didn't think it was his place. And the second thing, he knew it was just an impossible task to take on to try to govern people's personal lives. He preferred to inspire them with the teachings and that hope that their own experience would awaken them to their own potential and move in the right direction. He says, I have found, fortunately, that many couples treated with leniency and friendship come of their own accord to the path of loyal commitment in marriage. And that's what he's looking for, loyal commitment. In itself, moreover, marriage in America hasn't proved to be a truly sacred institution. So Swami's realistic. You can make a big deal out of it, but half the marriages in California, I think, end in divorce. We're not living in a time where that which God has joined together, let no man put asunder. You just get married and you hope for the best. I remember when a man's last child got married, even one of the wedding guests said to the father, it's such a relief to have your last child married for the first time. Because after that, it's their responsibility, not yours. I mean, it was such a cynical remark, but it was the truth. You just have the last one, and then after that, they're on their own. The path, and it's very interesting. One family that I knew, there had never been divorce, but then in my generation, there was a divorce, and then when there was a divorce in my generation, then the uncle got divorced. It was like suddenly it was there to happen, and now it happens at any age, at any time, because it's just not a sacred institution anymore. And that's the positive side, because instead of being wedded to rigid forms, people are actually trying to sincerely respond to their inner inspiration and the truth of matters. It is making for chaos and for an enormous amount of suffering and for a lot of license for fickleness and people not having the external motivation to triumph over some of their own weaknesses. But it's a mixed bag and it's not all bad. So, Swami says, leniency rather than judgment has won many to a serious commitment. Otherwise, the sin of overindulgence in sex is quite as possible within marriage as outside of it. So he's also realistic. It's nice to have monogamy, but you can still be overdoing your sexual life even if you only have one partner. And that's loyalty and self-control are the ideals. That's what Swami has to say. Loyalty and self-control. These are the ideas we're looking for. See, Swami puts it on the level of principle. He doesn't talk about sex is good, sex is bad. What's important is loyalty and self-control. Are the ideals, not, at this time in our society's development, the legal formality of a marriage document. What Swami is to say is marriage doesn't really guarantee any kind of morality. Marriage doesn't necessarily guarantee a more yogic life. It can help, but it doesn't guarantee it. This he's trying to say, don't be naive. And this is also Swami explaining, like, He wanted to draw the lines in the right places. Loyalty and self-control. He didn't want to draw the line on the legal document of marriage, or use over people's head. You took a vow in. Let's see. Eventually, Swamiji wrote a new marriage ceremony. When he married Rosanna in 1985, he wrote a whole new wedding ceremony. Prior to that time, we were using the vows that Master wrote, and it had right in the marriage vow, we will always be friends even if our bodies are parted by death or other separation. When I read that, I said, Swamiji, is Master just like building divorce right into the wedding vow? And Swami just said, well, let's just say Master was realistic. I mean, it was right there. We will always be friends even if our bodies are parted by death or other separation. So Master was being realistic. He came to America. He saw what was going on. He commented about, Americans are so fickle. They change their jobs, their homes, and their spouses at just the slightest inclination. And he talked about, by contrast, many, but not all, of the marriages in India, which were often arranged instead of romantically founded, he said he saw a greater percentage of happy marriages. But then Master shrugged and said, well, he said there's also an advantage to this system because people learn faster, meaning they have more experiences, they get the consequences of their experiences, and then at least they have the potential. Swami's response in this exact context was, when people make experience the criteria for their values, he said whatever values they come to will truly be their own. They will spring from inside. They will not be imposed from outside, provided that people are honest about their experience and really pay attention, rather than have a preordained theory and then suppress their feelings or just refuse to actually be realistic about what they're experiencing. And they affirm their freedom and they affirm their pleasure and they affirm all these things, and they're not really honest about it. But if we're honest about it, all experiences are to our benefit because we learn. We used to have the fun saying at Anand, it wasn't really about relationships, it was about everything. Well, that was a learning experience. That was another way of saying that was a disastrous mistake. And you would just say, well, that was a learning experience because, well, it wasn't a mistake. It was a learning experience. So that's what we're looking for. So Swami says, I hope and believe that society's present state of confusion will grow calmer with time and that people will return of their own accord to traditional ways. See, that's Swami's, I hope and believe that society's present state of confusion, I love the way he says it, will grow calmer with time, and that people will return to their own accord to traditional ways. There's so many things that work against things, and we have all these different forces coming together at the same time. We have this, well, actually, the introduction of birth control helped, easy access to women's birth control, pills and other forms of female birth control, liberated women from the fear of unwanted pregnancy at a time when a pregnancy outside of marriage was absolutely, as I said earlier, could destroy a woman's life. So we had that rise. Then we just had the general rise of the women's movement. Then we have women invading traditional male bastions of all the professions and all the businesses. And so whereas before, a man would have very little opportunity to be interacting on a daily, often I would say, I want to use the word intimate, but I don't mean that in sexual intimacy, but just working together, working long hours together, traveling together, facing big problems, conquering them together, interacting as peers, triumphing, going out on trips together, being with the gang and going to the bar afterwards. So men and women have all this familiarity, where in a traditional society, I'm not advocating, I'm just explaining, in a traditional society where there were very few women in the business world, men had that part of their life was just with men. And even their opportunity to get to know in that way women outside of their own family was extremely limited. And so when now if a man has an argument with his wife or it's become disinclined toward her for any reason at all, valid or invalid, he goes off to work, and there's any number of other women with whom he can form friendships, with whom he can spend time, and no one will even think it odd, in whom he can confide, and just the whole door just opens. And given, as we were talking about last week, of just, this magnetism between, I'm talking mostly about men and women, of course, the whole introduction of same gender, just creates all kinds of complexities, but also involves women in women and men freely associating all the time, instead of women being confined to a home, limited in their options, which was not so great for women. But this is part of why there's so much confusion. This is why Swami's saying, given the state of society now, given the conditions of society now, because we're working our way through this. People are just taking down all the fences, all the rules. They're even demanding the rights. I had a very interesting conversation with two high school girls. The girls were 17, 16, 17. They were full-grown women, and they were beautiful, both of them. Beautiful. They were inherently attractive, and they also just had a lot of magnetism. And the reason that I was meeting them, they weren't children of the community. They weren't actually people that I knew at all, although much later I learned that I did know one of the mothers. But they were just high school girls who had contacted me because they were doing a project for their film class, and they wanted to interview me about intentional communities. Sure, I'm always open. So these two lovely women come, young women come. It was the summer. They were wearing just about as little as you could wear and actually keep what people used to call their private parts covered. They had shirts. One of them had a shirt that, just kept falling off the shoulder, which made it perfectly clear that she had nothing on under it, because you could see her whole bare body just, above her shoulder, from her collarbone, it was all like that. And the blouse kept falling like this and that. And it was tied up, to show much of her midriff. And then the shorts were below her belly button, and the shorts were as short as they could be and still actually be on the body. The other one was something like that, except I think she also sported something. She sported some kind of a little midriff top, but then she had something transparent over it. So you're always like looking through her clothes. And she was also wearing tiny little shorts. And they were gorgeous women with these gorgeous bodies, just walking around like this. And they were unself-conscious about it. And they filmed me, and we talked about community. And one of the things I talked about in community was friendship, and how we work together to help each other, and how wonderful friendship is, and how deep friendships can be in community, just among other things, because, they weren't asking me about self-realization, so I wanted to talk about community. So afterwards, they had asked me questions, and we were just sitting together, and I said, you've asked me a few questions. I'd like to ask you a few questions. And so I asked, let me think how to say it. How did I actually start it? Oh, I said, are you aware that men physiologically have a visual sexual response? And they sort of looked a little dumbfounded. I said, for men, and I know women have become this way also, but the reason why women dress the way they dress, and the reason why, until recently, strip tease clubs and so on were just women dancing and men watching, is because man's sexual response is triggered by the sight of a woman's body. And so they looked at me and they said, how would we know that? I said, I don't know. Do you have a father, a brother, a guy friend, just like your boyfriend? Has anybody ever told you? A priest, a clergyman, your mother? Has anybody ever said that to you? And they acted like they'd never heard of it before, whether they were putting me on. They weren't dumb. I don't know whether I just shocked them by asking that question. I said, so have you ever considered, when you dress as you're presently dressed, have you ever thought of the effect that has on the young men around you? The answer I got was really interesting. Well, that's their problem. is what they said. That's their problem. I said, well, if you knew someone was an alcoholic, would you walk around with an open beer can in front of him all the time? Or would you think, gee, he's my friend, I want to support him in where he's trying to go and what he's trying to do. And then I talked to them about friendship. I said, if you're just going to walk around like this, and I sort of joked a little bit, but I had my licentious period, which was now more than 50 years ago. It was very short. I really wasn't suited for that life. But I always dressed like a nun, even during that period of time, because it just seemed to me like it was the courteous thing to do. Just that was all. It was just courteous. If I was interested in someone, I was interested in them, but I didn't want to just walk down the street and have any man walking down the street have to deal with the force of my body. I heard Satguru, that's his name. He's this Indian teacher. He's very popular. I believe that's what he's called. He had a brilliant answer to this. He deals with a lot of young people, and some woman asked him about provocative dress for women. He said, every person has many different aspects to their nature. He said, when a woman dresses like that, this was his phrase, she's leading with her biology. And he said, if you want to lead with your biology, he said, that's what you can do. I didn't know that phrase, or I would have said it to those girls. And a lot of women do want to lead with their biology, and it's a defiance. But it really distressed me to hear them talk like that. It's like it's their problem. It's the man's problem. And I thought, oh my God, it's going to be generations before we get this straightened out. Aren't we in this together? Aren't we going to try to help each other and, want to elevate our consciousness above our biology? But this is the context in which we're working. So this is why Swamiji, it was pointless. It was just no way he could work with any of this. Swamiji's way was always to just keep vibrating a high vibration, and those who were in tune with it would gradually see it. And it worked. That's exactly what he says. People of their own accord, once we separated ourselves a little bit from the chaos of the world around us, then people of their own accord began to see, the value of a little bit of restraint, a little bit of modesty, loyalty, all of the qualities that eventually, when our society gets it straightened out, Swami says we have to raise 2 generations. I mean, talking to those high school girls who've been empowered as women, and I'm all for it, but we are women and men. I mean, there's a reality going on here, or even women and women. Whatever it is, do you want to lead with your biology? Is it their problem? Or are we in this together? How can I be your friend? That did get their attention, I have to say that. What about friendship? What about just being a friend to someone and helping them? Oh, well, that's something to think about. I don't know if I had any impact on them, but it satisfied me at least to talk about it. This is how we should be talking about these subjects with people. But it's an uphill battle, but you have to start somewhere. Buckminster Fuller, who was a very forward-looking thinker, had many, 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 many innovative ideas. And at the end of his life, he was way ahead of his time. At the end of his life, he was being interviewed, and someone said to him, "Are you discouraged that nobody's paying any attention to your ideas?" And he said, "Not at all." He said, "Not at all." He said, "It always takes a couple of generations for new ideas to be accepted." And so here we are. We're breaking Kali Yuga. We're not going to deal with institutional forms anymore. People are not going to stay married because otherwise they'll go to hell. I mean, that's over. So now we get to do whatever we want. And women get to stand up for themselves, and men, everybody gets to do what they want. And we'll find out how that works. A friend of mine once said that simple question, how's that working for you? Well, gee, I don't know. How is that working for me? And maybe I have to start thinking about what's really going on here. But find out for yourself. I said to one of my young friends, he was 18 or 19 at the time, I said, well, your generation has just basically taken down every traditional value there is. So the good news is whatever values you end up with will be completely your own. And they will be from your own experience, and you'll really know. And there's power in that. Okay. Swami says, I'm glad to say that Ananda people are purer for this approach than many communities where the negative rules are sternly enforced. He's right about that. Where the negative rules are sternly enforced have not necessarily resulted in a stronger, better community. Just makes people a little crazier. I refuse to honor sexuality of any kind as a way of life. And he just sort of, that's the other side of it, which is, whether it's same gender relationships, it's the right, to have as many sexual relationships as you want. Swami would just never elevate sex to the defining reality in life. It's a personal matter. It's over here. How much do you love God? That's what really defines who we are, how much we love God. I refuse to honor sexuality of any kind as a way of life, but I feel that people must be allowed to grow naturally and sincerely toward a goal they have. Grow naturally and sincerely toward a goal they have, I hope, accepted in simply joining Ananda. So naturally and on their own speed to become more and more in tune with the highest and the refined realities that we can find. See, part of the point is that the whole path to God is just to transcend all these physical imperatives. So that's why Swami's not going to make sex the center of anything, because the whole path that we've accepted is that we're here to learn mastery over all the karmic compulsions. Physical body is one of them, but there's countless emotional compulsions and fear-based compulsions. We're trying to overcome the inclination to seek anything but God. And so, but we have to be allowed to grow in our own time. And that's what the genius of Swamiji and the genius of building Ananda has been, which is that he never forced anyone beyond their natural state. And as a consequence, among other things, people were free to be themselves, have been free to be themselves. You don't look around and see how you're supposed to behave and then behave that way. In fact, Swami, in one situation, said, don't even tell people what's expected of them to be members of Ananda. Just let them be themselves and find out who they are. And then we'll find out if they're appropriate or not. If you tell them what they're supposed to do, they'll just behave that way. And you'll never know who you really have, because it'll take time before that pretense breaks down. But if people are accepted as they are, not judged, but just encouraged, then much more power comes out of us. And the fruit is in it, because Ananda itself has grown magnificently because of that. That's what he says. Ananda people are purer for this approach than many communities where the negative rules are emphasized. So anyways, on with that. So now, Swami uses the summary of this letter is simply a true devotee. This was written in April of 99. This is a comment about someone else. I am sad about this third person no longer wanting to be part of Ananda. Swami's not writing to that person, he's writing about that person. I am sad about this person no longer wanting to be part of Ananda. I know that her husband would like to be with us, but we must respect his desire to be loyal to his wife. That respect, however, is qualified by the fact that a true devotee lets nothing, Swami writes that in all caps, lets nothing stand between him and God and between him and his chosen path. The Swami's, and that's the whole letter. So apparently someone wrote to Swami and said, to tell Swami that, this woman apparently wants to leave Ananda, and her husband is feeling that out of loyalty to his wife, he has to go with her. There's no reference to children here. Out of loyalty to his wife, he has to go with her. So Swami says, we have to respect his loyalty to his wife, because it's a quality that can be worthy of respect, loyalty, commitment. But then Swami says that respect is qualified by the fact that a person should let nothing come between him and his spiritual path and his quest for God. So there you have it. Those are hard choices. I remember several situations where Swamiji accepted that a person was going to choose a human loyalty, but I think he would have been happier to see the person choose divine loyalty. These are very, very tricky questions. There's a story of, in Master's life in the ashram there at Mount Washington, there was a couple during the time when Master was taking couples trying to start a community. And I don't know whether it was the husband or the wife, but one or the other said that they were leaving the ashram. And the other spouse said, "You may do what you like, but I remain with my guru." And that was that. And the spouse just left, but the other simply refused. So that's also a choice. And it's a powerful choice if it's the right choice. So, again, on sexuality and divorce, we just keep going, but that is the section we're in, isn't it? We have a few more pages. On sexuality and divorce at Ananda Village from March of '89. The question of renunciation and divorce is not easy to resolve. Once again, you see in all these letters, Swami is not making rules. He's saying that people are people and we have to do what works. Because the goal is to help people to realize God. It's not to sort of set up this atmosphere in which everybody behaves. So, the question is not easy to resolve. The essence of renunciation is giving up the sense of I and mine. In this sense, Ananda members, whether married or single, are renunciates, because I and mine is the issue, not whether or not you have a spouse. Swami always takes it back to the essential principle. It's not the form, it's what you're actually doing. So everybody's a renunciate because we're all trying to overcome ego, which is what a real renunciation is. Sex is only part of the story. But even here, they are encouraged to train themselves gradually to transmute their sexual energy. Few devotees, whether married or single, have reached the point of becoming completely chaste, that is to say, in thought as well as in deed. So Swami also makes the point that merely because you can restrain your actions doesn't mean that you actually overcome the desire. And sometimes the suppression becomes worse. So he wants to give space. People have to really grow into this. In this sense, none, even monastics, are complete renunciates until they have transcended their natural appetites both outwardly and inwardly. That uses that phrase, natural appetite. Swami is always so exact, and he wants us to really get it right. At the same time, however, one is justified in calling himself a renunciant if such transcendence is the true goal of all his aspirations. Isn't that just beautiful? You can call yourself a renunciate if that's what you aspire to be. Swami said in another context, whatever you've already accomplished, by definition, is already behind you. Because we aren't a static thing. We aren't a fixed form. We are a flow of energy. So by the time you've reached this point, you're already on to your next. Who you are is what you aspire to become. So we can call ourselves renunciates if that's what we aspire to become, because that's where we're going. I don't see why one should be faulted for a divorce if it was his partner who left him and who gave him or her no choice in the matter. So somebody must have raised a theoretical question about divorce inherently being unacceptable, and that, you're at fault if you're divorced. And Swami said, if somebody leaves you and leaves you no choice, how can that be your fault? I mean, it's not fair. It's just not right. There have been more divorces at Ananda than I would have liked. But I must say that, as long as people are trying sincerely to progress on the path, we must respect them for doing what we at least hope is their best. In any case, people have a right to make their own mistakes and to learn from them and grow from them. I remember there was a particular situation in the community where A man was married to one woman, but he was really in love with another. And all of them were good people. These were serious devotees. These were not people who were just playing with the path. And there was no affair, there was no adultery, but the man was unhappy because he felt he really should be with the other woman. And after quite a number of years, like 4 or 5, 6 years, the man finally said to Swamiji, "It's not working." And Swami said, "Well, you've made a very good effort. I admire you for your effort, and I admire both of you for your restraint, not having acted on this." And then he said, "You have to do what you have to do." And there was a certain sort of outcry in the community that, this shouldn't be allowed to happen. Swami said, people don't owe their whole lives to the community. They have to live their own lives in their own way. And it was so much of a more charitable, more realistic, and so much deeper teaching in a completely other context, meaning this was back in SRF when Swami was a monk there right after Master died. One of the monks left to get married, and he wanted to still serve the work. He wanted to serve the work as a married man by having a center, which most of their centers were run by married men, but he had been a monk. And the other SRF leaders refused to allow him to have any role within SRF because it would be, quote, a bad example. Swami's answer was, people come to us to become saints, not because they are saints. He said, and what was the power of Master was that we always knew he was on our side and he was our friend, and that his friendship for us was unconditional. He said, if we treat people so harshly, he said, everyone will lose heart, and they will also lose faith in the loyalty of their gurubhais to them. And so Swamiji never wanted people to lose faith in his and in the community's willingness to stand by them if they were at least trying to do their best. And again, by their fruits you shall know them. The power of the community and the family speaks for itself. Now Swami's writing in 2002 to a woman who had recently faced a serious crisis in her marriage. Thank you for writing. This episode has been painful for all of us. But I remember something my father said once. After a war, many things have to be forgiven if people are to get on with their lives. Swamiji often quoted his father in that respect because bad things happen. People have bad fights, people have betrayals, people fall from grace and do things that they really later deeply regret. Do we hold those things against people ever after? I've had people say to me, not who are part of Ananda, but from the outside, after so-and-so did that, how dare he show his face in the community? And Swami said there was a Taramata, no less a renunciate than Taramata in SRF, was a very advanced disciple of Master. She left, went off, and got married. And apparently Master did not necessarily approve of that, but she left, she got married, she had a child. The marriage did not work out. She moved back into Mount Washington, although she never actually lived at Mount Washington, but she came back to Master to be with Master in the ashram with her child now. And one of the nuns said very self-righteously, "I don't know how you dare to show your face here after the way you defied Master's guidance to you." And Taramata was just not one to be pushed around. She just looked right at the nun and said, "Do you want me to worship my mistakes?" It's like, why should I? I made a mistake, so what? I've repented of it, here I am. Like, what do we expect to happen? Because if you have that attitude, what happens when we make mistakes? We're not finished. We've just made a mistake. Let's learn from it. Let's move on. But if the doorway of redemption is slammed in our face, what possible good can come from that? So Swamiji says, this is a woman who had recently faced a serious crisis in her marriage. After a war, many things have to be forgiven if we're to get on with our lives. This is true of countless crises in human life. I'm glad to see in you the right attitude. Bless and move on. I really hope, and also believe that all will work out well in your life and in your husband's or the other man. See, I think it was a husband. Yes, it was her husband. And in your husband's and in your life together, I pray for both of you. Actually, this was one of the obvious ones. There was an infatuation. I'm nearly certain I know what this is, but regardless, you can see it. It was an infatuation that never rose beyond an infatuation, but it was enough to create chaos. Who knows where these delusions come from? And what Swami is saying is, these sudden attractions just pop up because we have many relationships over many lifetimes. I often try to make the distinction when somebody comes to me and they have an inappropriate attraction that is not going to be a good idea to follow. And they'll just sort of try to defend it on the basis of the intensity of their feelings. And so I have this little phrase in my mind: you can have karma with someone, but not have dharma with someone. So you may in fact feel that there's a very strong karmic tie, but that doesn't mean that it's dharma for you to follow that. And in this particular case, the karma was strong. Who knows where these delusions come from? But thank God, dharma was stronger in both parties, and they got through it. And they got through it very well. The important thing is to recognize them as such and to refuse to dwell on them any further. It was a delusion. It took me over. So there we have it. Now we're out of it. Remember our Ananda Sangha marriage vow. We will forgive one another always. And I believe it says, and in all circumstances. That's a big vow. That's a much bigger vow than, we'll just grit it out and die married instead of separating. We will forgive each other always. And I do believe it says, and in all circumstances. One should think carefully before you make that vow. You mentioned, he's writing to the woman, you mentioned numbness, which is a common reaction to deep hurt. I went through that many years ago and decided I'd only lose twice by not loving. I'm happier when I love, I realized, and unhappy when I don't love. And while I'd rather be unhappy than numb, I choose to love regardless of how I've been and am being treated. Swami and says, so that's the big thing, that we have to get through these things, not merely surviving, but we have to find a way to break through. We have to break through the sorrow. We have to face and transcend it. It's not, numbness is a kind of suppression. I just won't feel it. We have to actually know how deeply disappointed we are, and we have to transcend it with truth. In a situation where a woman was betrayed, she came to Swamiji at one point. This is in my book about Swamiji, and she said, well, what happened was it was exactly right. Everybody just behaved correctly, and it was really just fine what happened. And Swami said, no, it wasn't. He behaved very badly, is what Swami said. And then he said, don't comfort yourself with a lie. And that's another way of getting around it. We just pretend that everything was okay. No, it was terrible. And you were mistreated, and he failed to live up to his highest potential. But that is what happened. Just look at it right in the face and then make a decision about what is the best way for you to respond. And yes, the last time when we were talking about this, in a certain context, when people were judging Swami put forward, he said, if I'm guilty of what I'm accused of, and that means I'm really in trouble. And if you're going to be my friend, are you going to judge me and abandon me? Or are you going to stick with me and try to help me? And that's to say, I choose to love. If somebody has made a serious mistake, they need your help. That's when they need your love more. Now, it takes a very noble spirit to be able to do that. And Swamiji talks himself, numbness is natural. We can't force ourselves to be something we're not. But we have to ask ourselves over and over again, I don't want to lose twice. And if we're deeply disappointed and solve the problem by closing our hearts, then we have created a terrible problem out of what is really a minor problem. To be betrayed or disappointed or hurt because we opened ourselves and haven't been respected, is terrible. To close our hearts goes on and on for incarnations. One is an isolated incident where one person or another failed to live up to the highest that you'd hoped for. To close your heart and to be unable to have the courage to love people and put yourself out there with a loving spirit, that's a real problem, because that will just haunt you for a very long time. So you have to, don't comfort yourself with a lie. You have to face right into it and ask myself, who do I want to be at the end of this? And then do your very best to get there, however long it takes. Swami says, I choose to love regardless of how I've been treated. Thus, a major tragedy in my life, Swami said, became one of my greatest blessings because of the power it gave him to love regardless. The very challenge to have to love against betrayal makes you a saint. So is it a good thing or a bad thing to be tested like that? Makes kind of a mishmash out of good and bad experiences. Swami says, God bless you for hanging in there and for showing the willingness to work with your husband rather than apart from or against him. Now, if he will do the same, all will be smooth sailing once again. I deeply pray that it will. Wow. Okay. I'll do this one more, or maybe. In the 1990s, someone asked why a relationship had failed. I am sorry things did not work out. Now, this is to a man, he's writing. I am sorry things did not work out. Unfortunately, you draw disappointment to yourself by your very eagerness. Learn non-attachment by giving yourself more wholly to God in your heart. You will see then that the more you are detached, the more the world will run after you. But if you pursue it too eagerly, it will only turn its back on you. I'm going to finish the second paragraph before we comment, because here's where he really explains it. This is particularly true of women who are not attracted to weakness in men and who see weakness in excessive dependence on their company. You must be strong in yourself. Otherwise, they will continue to see you as a boy, not a man. So, this is the catch-22 people get into. We're very hungry for relationships. We're very hungry for love. We're hungry for sexuality, for intimacy. And then we're so hungry for it that a person who has any strength within themselves is not magnetic. It's just as simple as that. It's not magnetic. In your very eagerness to pursue, the world does not respond to you. And especially women are not attracted by too much, Swami doesn't use the word puppy-like behavior, but that's what he's saying. They'll see you as an immature person, not as a man. Well, Swami just says it like it is. I have no idea who this was, and I have no idea what the result was. But it could have gone under strong medicine, which is the next section. And this is to a parent involuntarily separated from his children. Swami writes, this was in the year 2000. I don't know the context here. Remember the chant. Oh, I do know the context, but I can't remember in detail. I can't remember why the man, but anyway, the mother was able to take his children away from him. Remember the chant, and it wasn't justified. Remember the chant, no birth, no death, no caste have I. Father, mother, have I none. The words would be equally true if you sang them as follows. Son or daughter, have I none. They are God's children, not yours. Perhaps God wants you to break your attachment to them, not to love them the less, but to love them in God and not as your own. Be free in your heart. Then love anyway, For in personal love, you are free. Oh my God, that is really a hard one, isn't it? So much happens. I can't bring to mind, or if I actually even know what the context was, but I remember something similar to this. You know how things happen in these days, and court decisions and other things, but somehow this man was forced, he wasn't able to be with his children, and he was heartbroken. I mean, you can imagine. But again, this is the chaos of the society we're living in. I was talking about it early this evening about just we've rattled so many traditional values that family life is incredibly fragile, and sometimes women, parents of children, um, can be terrible to each other, absolutely terrible, and terrible to their children. It's just we're not well brought up these days. We just don't have a structure. So Swami's saying, this was not your choice. This was an unavoidable thing that happened to you. So the only way for you to respond is to draw closer to God. And he challenges him, Father, mother, have I none? But he's not saying to abandon them in your heart, just to recognize that these children always belong to God, that everyone belongs to God. We're given these responsibilities, we're given these opportunities, but if God takes those opportunities away from us, we have to rise higher into it. We have to, I mean, these are really big questions. How much do I believe in God? How much faith do I have in God's will? If every door has closed to me and this is the only thing that's left to me, all common sense and everything in my own heart rebels against it. But this is what God has given me. So how can I rise to it? And this is what Swamiji says, impersonal love. You continue to love them, but the opportunity to parent them seems to be taken away from you. So you have to give them as much love as you would give them, but impersonally at a distance in God. And you have to constantly pray that God take care of them. And how much do we believe that that prayer will be heard? Well, these are terrible tests. These are terrible tests that people have. But if you think of it in reverse and think about how irresponsible people can be. A man asked me, he had a son who was severely disabled. And, they saved his life as an infant, but he did not have normal mental or physical ability. He was just completely dependent. And so this man was faced suddenly with lifelong parenting. Parenting would never be over for him. And this particular child was incapable of giving anything back. So it was just a complete sacrifice. And it caused a lot of strain between himself and his wife. These are, were tough things. So he took me aside in private and asked me, why would this happen to me? I said, I really have no idea, so I'm not answering you from intuition. I wanted him to know this. But imagine, maybe you had multiple children before, but were bored with your wife and tired of your life. So you found some young thing that infatuated you and just ran off. Left your wife to parent the children. Or maybe you had illegitimate children that you never took responsibility for and just left them to fend for themselves. So you have a karmic debt for parenting, by having not fulfilled your duty as a parent in the past, for whatever reason. You have to compensate now. You were self-concerned and not sufficiently willing to sacrifice for the sake of your offspring. Now you have to sacrifice everything for your offspring. Now, I'm not saying that that's true, and I don't want to be misunderstood, but everything is fair. There are no mistakes. So when very difficult things come to us, you have to really ask Divine Mother. You don't need a story, and you don't have to think you're being punished. You don't have to think I did something wrong. That man asked me a specific question, and that was the answer that came to me. Because you might just be being rewarded with the opportunity to rise to a much higher level of attunement to God than you would ever reach if you weren't pressed so hard to have to do it. So the question is always, Lord, why are you doing this to me? What are you asking from me? What can I learn? How can I receive this in the spirit of love in which you're sending it to me? And then give me the strength to meet this. Let your faith in me be justified. Give me your grace to be able to do this. So, my friends, God bless.